So I come to you today with a little bit of sorrow and grieving in my own heart. I found out earlier this week that there was a person that I had worked a lot with a couple parishes ago. His name is Miguel Martin. He was only 58 when he died, so it was kind of a sudden death. And he was a leader at a time that, first of all, helped me when I was just coming into learning how to speak Spanish and work with the Hispanic community. And he was quite the leader with an indigenous Mayan group from Guatemala. And so he was just wonderful working with me and working with his people. And I'm just kind of carrying him in my heart during my prayers during this Mass today. But it also gives me a lot of joy because one of the things about a lot of the Mayan people that make it here to the U.S. is they come here undernourished, so they're shorter. And when I was in this assignment, my mother, remember she's only 5'0" tall, she loved to be around the Guatemalans because there was like all these people she could look straight in the eye with. It was like her people because they were all more her height. Now remember, this is always in contrast because my dad is 6'5". So when you put my mom next to my dad, and you have this contrast, it makes her look even shorter. And I wonder if that's what Jesus is doing, is trying to make a very stark contrast in today's gospel. We hear this and we go, this sounds familiar because it's like the Beatitudes, because we're used to the Beatitudes, the 8 Beatitudes that we hear from Matthew's gospel. But what Luke does is he's giving some Beatitudes, and then he's helping us to understand what they're about by then also putting in contrast the woes. So he's making a contrast, and when we make a contrast, sometimes we understand what something is by also what it's not. And that's especially for us who are disciples. You notice he's preaching to all kinds of different people, but then when he gets to these teachings, it's for the ones that are committed to following him. So we almost want to pay even more attention. I think we really want to pay attention because these woes are very applicable to our present-day experience in our modern world. The woes are woes to the rich, to the fulfilled, to the laughing, and to those that others are speaking well of. You could say they speak about a set of values, about pursuing wealth, and comfort, and pleasure, and recognition. And if that sounds familiar, that's because that are the values, in many ways, of our greater society. That these are the things that you want to pursue. And they're ends in themselves. And Jesus is saying to us, whoa. Well, first of all, whoa. But whoa. Be careful that those aren't the values that you're pursuing. And I say this because we're so immersed in the wider culture that sometimes we're not aware of these values. And then sometimes we want these values to be put into our experience of our religion and our faith. And then we wonder when that doesn't fulfill that, then we say, well, there's something wrong with the practice of our faith if we're not aware. I wonder if sometimes people are walking away from what's not actually an authentic Christianity, but just a Christianity that rubs up against a different set of values. And we have to be real careful about this because what Jesus is inviting us to as disciples is a relationship that he defines, not that we define. And that if we're bringing in a set of values that helps if we're aware that this can happen, then instead of trying to force our religion to fulfill those, we begin to understand that there's something greater that Jesus is offering us. Because at the end of the day, Jesus never promises us like a nice job that has a decent pay. He's not promising us something that's psychologically comforting and soothing. He's not promising us a life that's full of fun. He's not promising us that, especially if we're good moral character people, then that people will respect us. Now that could happen. That could be one of the things that comes out of our faith in Jesus Christ. But they're not ends in themselves. And in fact, if they're given to us, then those are means in which we can not only deepen our life of following Jesus, but then leading others to that as well. The authentic relationship with Jesus, he defines this for us. Because we want to follow that. We want to plant our roots near the source of eternal life. Not these temporary values that are very hard for us to produce in our lives, and usually they're fleeting. They're not lasting. But if we plant our life next to the living stream, the running waters that we heard in the first reading, and it's this first psalm, by the way, Psalm 1. This is how the book of Psalms, this is like the core of what it means to be a faithful follower. Put your roots next to the running waters, and then when there's droughts, when there's the heat, that you endure that and stay green. That our life is full of love and grace, and that our life produces fruit. When we allow the relationship to be on Jesus' terms, then that's what we find in our life. And if we're given anything, then we're given that to help others. Particularly as Jesus is very explicitly referring to the poor, the hungry, the grieving, and the persecuted and oppressed. I think this is why I'm carrying my buddy Miguel Martin in my heart, because of his story. He was around Guatemala in the 1980s. If you're familiar with their Central American history, that was a time period, particularly in Guatemala, in which government troops were, especially with the indigenous Mayan people, assuming everybody was aligned with leftist guerrillas. And so they would go in with their military might, and he told me the story of hearing them come and having to flee and watching many people in his village getting killed by these soldiers, and having to flee the country, and coming to the United States and being granted asylum, and bopped around and then landed here in Indiana in the 1990s. And spent basically the rest of his life as a nice, humble line worker at a packing plant. But he also was a wonderful father. He raised 5 children, including a Marine and some college graduates. He was always learning and enthusiastic about his faith, and became a person that was always talking and teaching and preaching that, and not just helping others to grow in their faith, but bringing others to be baptized into the Catholic faith. And then he was really good at just helping people in whatever need they had in one-on-one situations, but also organizing groups and raising lots of money and just making an impact, not just here in Indiana, but back home in his home country. Literally touching hundreds of lives. And again, just a humble line worker at a packing plant. See, what Jesus is inviting us to is an authentic relationship with him, especially rooted in his church, the graces of the sacraments and the wonders of his love and of our teachings. And when we do that, especially when we're then able to see how that can really impact other people in whatever way God calls us to, and that is what we'll find the flourishing of our lives, the fruitfulness of our lives, and the fullness of grace. And in that, then, we will hear Jesus' words and live them out. Rejoice and leap for joy, for our reward will be great in heaven.